I'll share a little bit about myself, right? So let me move out of the way here. I'm gonna move the chair. Yeah, so I'm originally from Miami, Florida in the United States, right? If we're looking at a map of the US, this is Florida, very south. Miami is very, very south, right? So it's very hot and warm and tropical, right? I've been teaching for over 6 years, right? So I'm currently teaching in Uzbekistan, but before that I used to teach in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan at the American University of Central Asia, AUSA. I taught there for about a year. And I also used to teach in Vietnam and Thailand, and I taught students online in China. So I have some experience with different types of students. But also, on top of that, I have been in Uzbekistan once before coming here again in September. I was a teacher trainer in Nukus, Kyrgyzstan. So I was in Kyrgyzstan. It's a very cool part of the country. Yeah. So these are just the little flags here. You know, we know these flags. Let's point out, which flag is this?
Vietnam.
Yes, you got it, Dina. What about this?
Thailand.
Thailand. What about this?
Kazakhstan.
Yeah. What about this one?
Kyrgyzstan.
Easy.
USA.
You know it.
Jamaica.
Jamaica. You got it. So the Jamaica flag, I know I didn't mention it here, but my family is originally from Jamaica. My parents were born and raised in Jamaica. I was born and raised in Miami. So if you look at this map again, right, we still see the US, right? There's Miami, right up there, right? There's Cuba. We know Cuba.
Yes.
Okay? Right below Cuba is Jamaica, right? So that is where my family is from. And that's a huge part of my history. And a lot of people in Miami have a similar cultural background. Many of us are born in this region of the world or, you know, Central and South America as well, right? And also this is the university I teach at, Journalism and Mass Communications University, right? I'll let Ilene also to share a little bit more about
So
herself.
I teach at World Economy and Diplomacy University. I'm from California. I'm from LA actually, but I don't live there anymore. Now we moved to Tennessee. So this is part of the region we call the South. And the South is where a lot of history with just a lot of African American culture there. And it's still really, just really recognized and honored today. So, yeah.
I agree. So moving past that, Ilene has mentioned the history of the South, right? Let's talk a little bit more, right? What do you know about Black History Month? So we talked about it a little bit, right? But if you feel like you don't know anything, let's say, what would you want to know about Black History Month? What are some questions you might have?
History of the month.
History of the month? We will do that, great. What else? What are we feeling?
Why people celebrate the month.
Why people celebrate it, good.
What do they do around that? Like how do you celebrate it? What do you cook, meals?
Okay, okay, if there's like meals and celebratory, okay, that's a great one. What else?
How do you celebrate?
How to celebrate it, great. Is your hand raised?
No,
Or you're just kind of like
I'm sorry.
expressing yourself? It's okay. All right, anyone else?
What's the purpose of celebrating?
What's the purpose? Great, these are all great questions, right? I'm gonna try my best to get into all of those questions either now or when we have our conversation a little later, okay? So this is what we're gonna do today. We're gonna talk about history. Sadly, I can't talk about the whole history. It's a lot of history, right? Over 400 years of history. It's history that even starts before the United States becomes a country, right? So it's a very long history. But I will try my best to put as much as I can into about 10, 15 minutes, right? Then we're gonna look at 5 modern day Black leaders in the United States, right? Because when we talk about history, it's not in the past, right? It's still happening, it's today, right? So we wanna look at 5 people that are impacting today. Then we'll have a conversation, right? So whatever I did not answer, I will hopefully answer in that conversation, or Ilene will also answer in the conversation, okay? So let's get into it. First, we'll try to talk about the history. Again, this is over 400 years of history. I cannot cover it all, right? I'm also not a history teacher here, so I wouldn't really know where I would even start with that, right? What about for you, Ilene?
Yeah, when I think, like, because I have a lot of students who ask me, they want to know, and I recently just taught them a little bit about, like, original history of the U.S., and so we did go into Civil War a little bit, and so to get even there, you still have to give a little bit more of the background behind the trading industry,
Yes.
and what that was like for agriculture, what that was like for the economy, so, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of history even before that history, right? So before we start, right, I first have to say Black history is US history. I think oftentimes when people hear it, they're like, oh, why is it separate from the other parts of the history we learn about the United States? It's because for a long time, this part of history was often overlooked or ignored, right? A lot of people, even in the US, right, didn't always get to learn about these important parts of what makes the United States what it is today. So it is important that when we discuss this and why we talk about Black History Month is to acknowledge and recognize the milestones, the history, the successes of Black Americans. Because Black Americans have been in the United States since the beginning, right? So there needs to be some sort of discussion about that, right? So we're gonna look at the history. I'm gonna click that. So I'm not gonna be able to get into everything here, but history.com has done a wonderful job of trying to get as much information as they can, right? So to start, right, I'm gonna pause this video right now. The first slaves to come to the United States was in 1619. They were slaves that were from the African continent. So the 1619 number is very important because around this time, the people who settled in the United States only came around 1607, right? So it wasn't even 20 years until they decided, well, we need laborers, we need slaves. Do we know what a slave is?
Yes.
What is a slave?
The person who, like, who is your, how can I say?
The person who works for you for free.
Yes.
Like who belongs to
Belongs to you.
Yeah, it is property, it's an ownership.
It's property, yes. And sorry.
And in our part of the country, when we talk of slaves, normally slaves are gotten in war of
Yes.
conquest. So I come invade your place and then I take you as a slave,
Yes,
meaning you have no authority over yourself. I control, I decide what you do.
exactly. That is the idea, right? And I knew you were gonna say something.
Yeah, I was saying that thing, yeah.
Same thing. Okay, great.
Interesting point.
Yeah, so I will show you, I'm gonna go on Google a little bit and show you a little piece that I think is important. So when we talk about slaves, right, making sure I'm typing, I see both Cyrillic and English characters. So when we talk about slaves, I have to show you just a visual to show you what this looked like. So I'm gonna open this up for us so we can see, all right? So on this map, there's important areas that we're gonna focus on, okay? Europe, Africa, and the Americas, North, Central, and South America, okay? So how this all originally started was European settlers, conquerors, shipmen, I would call them, right? Had manufactured goods that they bring down to the continent of Africa, right? So they had these things they want to make, but they didn't have enough people to make them, right? So what they did was, here in the continent of Africa, mainly West Africa, right? So where Ghana is, but also other parts of Africa, they took people that were being sold. Oftentimes it was people that were being sold because they were war prisoners from other tribes, right? So they were selling them, right? So they took these individuals that were being sold and they shipped them to North America. But I will tell you, this 400-year history is actually a lot longer. It's actually a 600-year history because this originally started when they shipped these slaves to the Caribbean. That started about 600 years ago. So places like Haiti, Dominican Republic, Jamaica had slaves before North America did, right? So when they shipped these slaves, right, they had these materials that they can now make. They have the resources, they have the people, they can now make the product, right? And the biggest resource they made is cotton. And we're gonna talk about that in a little bit because cotton is also very important in Uzbek history, right? So seeing this, right, this journey in green, right, was a very long journey. For some, about 3 months, right? And during this time, a lot of things happened. I will show you a short video, not the whole thing, but a short video on what it was like on these ships. Because these ships carried hundreds of people. And in total, these trips happened thousands of times, right? For a total of about 12 million African slaves to come to the United States. So I'll play just a short part of the video. I will put the captions on so we can hear what is being said. And we'll play it. Thank you. Oh, do I need to put the sound on here? Let me put the sound just a little higher here. Nothing. Do there need to be other speakers? Let me pause it. Maybe. Okay, I see, it's on the TV itself. Okay, thank you. Yeah. All right, that looks good.
Yeah.
I don't wanna
Yeah.
hurt
Weapons
anyone's ears.
mounted on deck in case of rebellion,
Let
and
me rewind
additional
it back,
compartments.
okay?
From about 1525 to 1866, 12.5 million Africans were taken from their homeland and forcibly shipped across the Atlantic. A journey that almost 2 million of them wouldn't survive. By the turn of the 18th century, European merchants were building vessels capable of transporting hundreds of slaves per journey. These ships had extra portholes for ventilation, weapons mounted on deck in case of rebellion, and additional compartments added below deck to take on more human cargo. Before boarding the ships at African port cities, slaves were stripped of their clothing and remaining possessions and had their heads completely shaved. During boarding, which could take weeks or even months, slaves lived on the deck of the ship in a temporary wooden house constructed by the crew. The crew also installed netting around the deck of the ship, designed to catch slaves who might opt for death over forced servitude. Once moved below deck, slaves would find themselves stuffed into compartments with ceilings as low as 4.5 feet, where they would spend most of their voyage. They were segregated by gender and age. Adult men were kept separately and shackled in pairs. Women usually left unbound in their designated compartment, and children often free to move about the ship.
So I will explain what's happening in this video, right? So they're showing that even before these slaves come to the United States, there is a voyage, there's a journey, right? And in this journey, what usually happens is these individuals are taken from their homeland, right? They're taken from their clothes, their hair is cut off, right? And they're put in shackles, right? Then, when they are put in shackles, they are boarding this giant ship. The ship made to keep them there for several weeks or several months. It's usually about 3 months, right? Once they are on the ship, right, the ship is built in a way that makes sure that they cannot leave, of course. So if we're looking at the ship, there are nets on the side of the ship, right? So if someone wants to jump off, right, they will be caught in the net so they can be brought back, right? And keep in mind, a lot of these individuals did not know how to swim, but they would have rather drowning in the ocean than going to this new world that they were promised, right? Not in the same way that other people were promised, of course, but a lot of them rather have died than make it to this. Because once they made it to the US, their lives became more and more difficult and challenging, right? So what you're seeing here, and in the rest of the video, we can't play all of it, but they go into the living conditions, right? So people are basically smushed together, body to body, on top of each other, right? These are people coming from all over Africa, right? So different languages, different cultures, different people. They can't communicate with each other. There is no common language for many of them, right? And on top of that, men and women are separated, right? So if you're married, you're separated from the person you were married to, right? So this is a situation that they also cannot use any bathrooms, so they must use the toilet where they are, right? They are fed once a day, but then they're forced to exercise so that they're strong when they land in the new world, right? And on top of that, they're also made to perform for the people there, right? So early on, it's not the best history to start with. People are already being dehumanized, right? Their humanity, what we talked about earlier today, is not there, right? Because they're seen as property. So if we keep going, right? Once they land in the US, they work for the cotton industry there, right? So I know the cotton industry in Uzbekistan is very new history, right? I've met some people who said, I remember picking cotton as a kid, right? So you know cotton is a very difficult plant to pick,
Yes.
right?
We've tried before.
Yes, right? It's very hard. It takes a lot of work, a lot of people, right? In the same way, it's true in the United States, right? But the difference was none of these individuals were getting any benefits from the cotton picking. There was no money, right? There was no housing. There was nothing that was really given to them for all their hard work. Because during this time in US history, a lot of slaves were not allowed to go to school. So they were not allowed to read and write. It was actually illegal to teach a slave to read and write, right? And if a slave was caught reading or writing, they might cut off one of their hands or cut out their tongue, right? There's also situations where slaves can't get married, right? So they're not allowed to have a marriage, meaning that when a mother and father is sold, they can be sold separately because there's nothing legally keeping them together. The same with their children, right? So all these these different things you're noticing, right? There's no education, there's no actual money, there's no health care, there's no idea of family, right? And people had to live like this for hundreds of years, right? Until we get to, I'm gonna skip over some things, because sadly we just don't have the time, but there's a lot of great stuff here.
Harriet Tubman, former slave and
Harriet Tubman is another wonderful figure that we can get into. Until the Civil War, right? So the Civil War started in 1861, and I'll show just a map, right? It is this idea of the North and the South. They were fighting to keep the country together. If you want to kind of talk a little bit more about that.
And the biggest divide of like what separated the North and the South was the disagreement on whether or not we should keep the slave trade. So for the South, it was a huge profit gain for them, but for the North, they were understanding the human rights were being violated, and they just had a different, more liberal perspective, and they wanted change for the country, but because they disagreed, now our country is in war together.
Right. So you're seeing here all these blue states, that's considered the Union. So that is the group that did not want slavery, and they wanted to move the country forward with something else. Whereas these gray states you see, this is the South. Still very much, I think there's still a divide today, right? But the South, they relied on slavery. Their economy was agriculture. Their economy was cotton, right? White gold, right? So they did not want to get rid of slaves because that was what was giving them money, right? But the North did have slavery, but they got rid of it earlier, right? So they no longer relied on it. They had factories. They had other things to make them money. So they were saying, why do we still have this system? The system that is not helping human beings, the system that is hurting human beings, right? So around this time, the South actually wanted to form their own country, the Confederate States of America. So they did form their own country for a few years, right? And around this time, the North and the South were fighting until 1865, where the Union, the blue states, won the war and combined the country and got rid of slavery, known as the 13th Amendment.
Does anyone know who the president at the time was?
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln.
You got it, Abraham Lincoln. Perfect, yes. He was fighting very, very hard to keep the country together, right? It was not so united. So, going back from the Civil War, in 1865, now you have a post-slavery South. And what does this mean? It means you just freed about, let me highlight it here. Actually, I have a mouse. I don't know why I'm not using that. Okay. You just freed about 4 million people. What felt like overnight, 4 million people are free. But keep in mind, remember, many of them cannot read or write. Many of them were not able to get married, so their family could be separated all across the country. Many of them did not have health care. Many of them only had the skills to pick cotton. So what do you do? What jobs can you do? What schools can you go to? Schools that may not even allow you in because you are Black. So what is your life like, right? Around this time, because when slavery ended, right, the slave owners, the white people, mainly white people, vast majority, that owned them, did not want to just say, okay, goodbye, enjoy your freedom. No. They still had farms that needed people, right? So what they said was, many of them, they said, okay, you can be free, but you need to pay me back for the tools you used. You need to pay me back for the food I gave you. You need to pay me back for the housing I provided you while you were here. So a lot of these individuals ended up becoming slaves again in a form of sharecropping, right? So then around this time, you're also having things like the Black codes, or you're having things like separate but equal. I won't get into the Plessy versus Ferguson case, but it's a very important case. It decided, okay, Black people are equal, but we're gonna separate them. We're gonna give them their own schools, their own houses, their own hospitals, their own stores, and they can live their lives separately from us. Separate, but equal. That's the idea, right? And it looks something kind of like this.
And like I said, that was mostly in the southern part of the country because just willingness to receive a change, it just was difficult for them.
Yes. But even in other parts of the country, although separate but equal did not exist, it was still very difficult for Black people because, again, many of them are going to these different places and they don't have the same education, or they don't have the same jobs, or they don't have the same skills. So what can you do? This is a very, I think, great photo around this time period, mainly in the South, right? Where you see there's a white water fountain and a colored water fountain, right? So even though things were separate, they were not equal, right? Yes, Black Americans had something, but it did not have the same quality, the same value as the other things, right? Or you'll even see, I'm gonna go to my next slide here, right? I'm gonna show just a little bit more pictures.
I think at this moment, like what I would want to say, like, is that the community of the African Americans, they just really started to find their voice and started to realize, like, no, we do belong here. This is our country, and we are important part. And so they just started to speak up on behalf of their people.
Yeah, a lot of Black Americans were getting very tired. They were saying, our families have been here for hundreds of years, yet we do not have the same access to the other things that people do if they are American, right? So you're seeing situations like this. I'll kind of like highlight this picture. So this is in a bus, right? These are Black American women that are on the colored side of the bus. So this is very important because buses around this time, mainly in the South, in the United States, were separate, but equal, right? So this is the idea. The bus driver is at the front of the bus, right? And anyone at the front of the bus can sit there, they are white, right? Black Americans had to sit at the back of the bus, right? And the idea was if the front of the bus was full, white people can sit in the back of the bus. But if the back of the bus is full, Black people cannot sit in the front of the bus. They would get arrested, right? And this is what led to many different things, like the bus boycotts, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. speaking up about this. So I'm gonna go through a few photos. They're not in chronological order, right? Some are modern day Black history, some are more historical moments. So I wanted to highlight these actually.
And also, like, during the protest movements, like, there was just a lot of violence as well. So people just, you know, didn't like that they felt empowered to say something. And so there were just a lot of violent acts of crime against them.
Yes, right? So you're seeing these protests, as Ilene mentioned, right? People are wanting schools, they're wanting jobs, they're wanting equal rights, right? And then you're also seeing these protests as well, right? These situations where schools did start including Black Americans, right? In the South mainly, you're seeing that these new Black students have to be escorted, they have to be guided to their classrooms by the US Army because the schools will not let them in the classes. The schools, the principals, even some of the students were very angry and did not want them in the same rooms with them. They said, oh, Black people, they don't learn as fast as us, they're not as smart as us, they're gonna distract our students, they're gonna hurt our students. We don't want them with our kids. And that was an idea that I think also still exists in some parts of the South today. But you're seeing a lot of these protests, right? Or you're seeing, let me go down here, because there's a few. All right, you're seeing women marching, a woman asking segregation must go now, right? But you're also seeing situations, let me go right down here, like this, right? Where you're having protests, right? And you're seeing men saying, I am a man, right? There's a sign on their bodies, and they're marching in front of, again, the US military, right? For a long time, many Black Americans felt the US was fighting them, right? This was supposed to be a country that was their home, and the US was fighting them, right? So you're seeing these different things. Those are military tanks in the background, right? So you're seeing all these different things. Or this situation where a woman is crying because there was a bombing at her Black church that killed 4 girls, right? This bombing killed her daughter. So you're seeing these situations that are happening mainly because of this idea that the United States for a long time did not want Black Americans to stay there, right? They tried to do different things like sending us back to different parts of Africa. They tried all those different things, but just in general, this history has not been a happy one. But it does not mean there is not happiness within it, right? because you're seeing Martin Luther King Jr., some of you may have known, right? So you're seeing all these different images. I'm gonna go back up, because those are more of the modern day pieces, right? But you're seeing that this history still exists today, right? This is from 2016 in Charlotte, North Carolina. After a black man was killed by police, you're seeing people that are trying to use their voice and talk out against police brutality, right? Or you're seeing things like Black Lives Matters. Maybe some of you may have heard of that, or maybe not, right? It is this kind of idea of the new civil rights movement, right? Showing Black Americans that we still have things we need to fight for, right? Or you're even seeing pictures like this, remembering those that were affected by this type of treatment that does still exist today. The US has improved in a lot of ways, but there are still a lot of ways it needs to improve, right? And this is just one of those situations. So, kind of going back, right? I just want to highlight some important dates for the United States, right? 1619, slavery begins in the United States, right? Then you have almost 200 years, or a little 200 years more, 250, I'm not great at math, about 250 years after that, the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. It ends slavery, right? But then you have this huge piece in the middle where a lot of this history was almost lost. It was almost gone. Again, very rarely was it talked about, not only in the South, but in the North, right? And very rarely did people want to recognize this history because it's so negative for the United States. But in 1970, the first Black History Week started, and it eventually turned into a month that we celebrate today.
And can you answer the question, why is it February?
Yes. So the reason why Black History Month is in February is because when the week started, they initially used the week that was both Frederick Douglass's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday, two very important leaders in Black history. So they wanted to use their birthdays as the starting point for the week. And then it eventually became Black History Month after they decided we're going to include more individuals that were important to this movement. So, I know I talked a lot at you all, but I want you to answer this question for me, okay? Can someone read that for me, please?
The former U.S. Ambassador to Uzbekistan, Pamela L. Spratlin,
Perfect.
is a Black American.
Yes. Is it true or false? If you think it's true, hold up a 1. If you think it's false, hold up a 2.
What if we don't know?
It's okay. Give your best guess.
I think false.
Okay. If you think it's false, hold up a 2. If you think it's true, hold up a 1. Okay. All right. Ready for the answer?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
the former U.S. ambassador to Uzbekistan, right, Pamela L. Spratlin, was a Black American woman. She was the ambassador from 2014 to 2018, so almost 10 years ago, and she was also the former U.S. ambassador to Kyrgyzstan. So she's been in this region for a little bit, right? So there has been representation before of Black American history, even here in Uzbekistan. And of course she learned Uzbek, because the ambassadors have to. So she knows some Uzbek. But let's read this quote now. Let's move to the next section.
There are still many cows worth sacrificing for so much history yet to be made.
Perfect. Michelle Obama. So what do we think of this quote?
Is that Obama's daughter?
White.
White?
Yeah.
The first lady, yes. Well, former first lady.
Yeah. So what do we think? This quote from Michelle Obama, it's saying, you know, there's a lot of history that we've had, right, that we've sacrificed for, right? But there's still so much to be done, right? And that's true for any country, right? The United States is still fairly young. Of course, not as young as Uzbekistan, but still young in the grand scheme of the world's history, right? So when we're looking at this, right, there's still a lot of community we can talk about today, and we will in a second. Do you have any questions so far?
Yeah, I've got.
Yeah.
Like in America, we knew that there are one type of like Black American, Southern. Are there any other type like African American people?
So the reason why I say Black American instead of African American is because African American means your family has lived in the US for hundreds of years, right? My family, being from Jamaica, has only lived in the US since the 1980s, right? Black American for me is a term that includes all Black people in the US, right? Whether our family is from the US or from a different country. It just means that we are African descended, Black American, right? So there are more than just South Black Americans. There are Black Americans from California, Black Americans from Chicago, Detroit, Minneapolis, Boston, New York, all over the country.
No, I mean that like they are coming as a silver million like hundreds of years ago
Mm.
from other country, or they are just was born in there in California, or
Some of them were most Americans that are Black were born in the US, right? But you're seeing in the US a lot of people are immigrating from different parts of the world, right? So my family just happens to be one of those families.
Like from Jamaica.
Yes.
Others from other African countries.
Yes.
Others even from Brazil, because I know Brazil too was also one of the places that they took Africans there.
Yes.
So
Yes.
from there, then they were
There's a
roots
big,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah, there's Black Brazilians, there's Black Nigerians and Ghanaians in the United States. So that's why I say Black instead of African American. So that's just me personally. Everyone is different.
all right.
Yeah, but did I answer your question?
Yeah, I guess.
Gotcha.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, I think in America there are some rules that protect African Americans. So I think racism does not exist in America.
So you don't
Am
think
I
it
right?
exists? You're not right. I will be honest
It
with
still
you.
does.
So there are laws in place ever since the civil rights movement. There are laws in place, right? But even these pictures that we just saw, if I go back, right? These pictures are from not even 10 years ago,
Yeah.
right? These
Floyd-
pictures are from
George
not even
Floyd.
10 years
George
ago.
Floyd murder.
George Floyd being one of
Or
them.
4
I think
years
2020.
ago. Yeah, 2020.
Whoa, yes, 4 years. It's been 4 years now.
So if I go down, George Floyd is down here, right?
Yeah.
So just because there are laws, a lot of people need to remember that humans take a while to
Yeah, yeah.
change. Human beings take a while to change, right? So there are new laws, of course, right? But these laws aren't always enforced, right? People don't always know them. And then on top of that, a lot of the stuff that you're seeing happened within people's lifetimes. There are people still alive today that have experienced some of these things, right? So humans take a while to change. Laws can change, but the society itself can take generations. So there is still racism, and it's still a big issue, not just for Black Americans, but for Asian Americans, Native Americans, Latin Americans, in
And I
general.
think that's important, like to address the question earlier, like
Yeah.
why do we have this month? And the biggest thing is like we're educating people, we're remembering, and through that we can hopefully realize like how to honor, and little by little that will remove like the racist or the negative perceptions that we have against anyone from a different type of background than us.
Yes,
Mhm.
because it does still exist. Even me, I'm only 26 years old, but I even had people scream from their cars and call me the N-word walking home from school. And a lot of people would think, oh, that happened years ago. No, it happened within my lifetime. So it does still exist. It's still a huge problem, which is why I'm here today, right?
Mhm.
Any other questions? Because that's a good question.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay. So, I'm hoping you did learn something new from this section, right? Again, I couldn't go over all the history, but I tried my best to give the biggest moments, because now we're gonna get into the modern day leaders, right? Because Black history, again, is not always negative. There are, as you say, the phoenix rises out of the ashes, right? This idea of after things burn, right, something grows. So there has been growth, creative growth, music, art, culture. There's been scientific growth. There's been economic growth. So we're gonna go over 5 leaders that demonstrate those different ideas. The first one is Oprah Winfrey. So who has heard of Oprah Winfrey before? I'm guessing you have. What do you know about her?
She has her TV show,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken, yes.
The Oprah Winfrey Show.
Yeah.
Great. Yes. What else?
And she's also a gender advocate.
Yes.
She's so strong. She's one of the pioneers of gender advocacy. I mean, where you have to pay male and female the same price.
Yes.
For example, if I'm working in American embassy as, let's say, PR officer,
Mhm.
a male PR officer and a female PR officer ought to be paid the same amount of money,
Right.
not because she's a male or she's a female.
Mhm.
And she's also helping fighting sexual abuses among
Yes.
women as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Go ahead.
You're very right. Both of you are very right. She had the Oprah Winfrey Show, which was a show where she had on different guests from all over the world, and she would talk to them. It could be celebrities, world leaders. It could be just very important people, right? She would have people come on and share their stories. She's also an advocate for women's rights and gender equality. So she has built schools, not only in the US, right, but she's built schools in different parts of Africa, specifically South Africa, for girls who would not have the opportunity to study otherwise. So she has done her best in that. Also, she is the US's first Black female billionaire. So a lot of her work has led her to have money that she eventually invests in the communities that she's from, right? But keeping in mind that she was not born in a rich family, right? She grew up in poverty,
Yeah.
right? I think it says it
Yeah, despite
right
being
here.
born in poverty. Yeah.
Exactly. So she grew up in poverty. So she did not always have this access that she has today. And she's tried for most of her career to share it. She's also an actress. So moving from Oprah Winfrey, now we have Neil deGrasse Tyson. Who has heard of Neil deGrasse Tyson before? Yes. What do you know about him?
He's the astronomer or scientist.
Yes.
I think he went to Cornell. Very famous scientist.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's very popular in the US.
Yeah, he is. So yeah, you definitely got it. So he's an astrophysicist. He studies the planets and the stars. He's a scientist, right? He actually went to Harvard for his bachelor's degree. So you're very close. But essentially, his role here is that he helped a lot of people understand science more in the day-to-day. Because science is not really a strong subject in the United States. Science and geography are not the strongest subjects. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we could do
Yeah.
better with that.
Yeah.
So he's tried making it more of a conversation, make people more interested in science as a career, right? And some of the things he's done is he's worked for a former US president, President George W. Bush, and he worked on his administration as a space expert so that they can learn more about space and explore it during that time. He also had his own TV show as well, similar to Oprah Winfrey. He had Nova Science Now, where he talked about science and made it in a way that people can understand, right? And also, he has an asteroid named after him. So, for those of you who are like, oh, that's kind of weird, what is that? So, here, let me type it in. Obviously, this is just going to be like an artist rendering. I don't know what the actual asteroid looks like. But, essentially, he does have a,
If we can see it through telescope.
yeah. If we could see it through a telescope, right?
Doesn't he have show?
He has two asteroids named after
She
him.
just said that, a show.
Yeah, he does have a show. Yeah, Science Nova Now. Yeah, which I think still plays some of his episodes.
Yeah, I know.
So he has an asteroid named after him, which is a very notable thing in science to have a giant space rock named after you, right? Okay, so that's Neil deGrasse Tyson. Okay. Next, we have Dr. Kizzmekia Kobet Helade. She got married, so that looks French. I don't know how to quite pronounce that, but she's an immunologist and a professor. She's a viral immunologist. Do we know what an immunologist is?
Yeah.
What is it?
Someone who works the immune system. He's
Yes.
a specialist in the immune system, how our body will be able to fight against diseases
You
and
got
viruses
it.
that come into our system.
Exactly. She works with the immune system and the body's ability to fight disease, what's healthy and unhealthy for the body, right? So she's also a professor. She works at Harvard University in their public health sphere, right? And she was actually the lead to develop the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. So there are different vaccines, right? Moderna, AstraZeneca,
Sputnik.
Pfizer, the Sputnik one, which was developed here in Uzbekistan, right? There's different vaccines. She helped develop one of them, her and her team. Because she's been working on these types of viruses for years. So she had information that she used to create something that has saved millions of lives. So she is one of those people that I think oftentimes are now getting recognition because it's so new. This is during COVID-19. But I think she's showing that, science has been a very important part of Black history as well. And then we have these two young gentlemen here. We have Chenik Kamada and Ermias Tedeschi, right? So these are two young entrepreneurs, right? They are Cornell University students, and they founded Cornell's first ever Black Gen Capital, an investment fund for Black Americans, right? So they are running this specific investment fund to show people different ways to approach finance, to have stock interviews if they want to increase the funds that they have. And they're also making workshops for underrepresented communities. They're not just Black Americans, but Latin Americans, Asian Americans, other groups that are not typically found in investment and finance. So these two young gentlemen have started this program back before COVID-19, around 2019, and they're still working on it today. So, last but not least, we have Kamala Harris. So who knows Kamala Harris?
Vice President.
Vice President.
U.S. Vice President.
Vice President, yeah, yeah, cool. Do we know where she's from? What state?
She's from US.
Yeah, she's from, yeah,
State.
which state?
She's Christian.
I mean, she probably is Christian, okay? So Kamala Harris, as you've all mentioned, Vice President of the United States of America, but she's also the first woman Vice President of the United States, the first African American Vice President, and the first Asian American Vice President, right? So her parents are immigrants, like my parents, right? Her mom is from India, her dad's from Jamaica, like my family, right? So here, we're gonna watch just a short video just to show a little bit about her life. I'm gonna click it one more time. Okay. I'm gonna have someone be so kind to read for me as we're doing this. I can just click it up here, actually. Let's just learn a little bit more about Kamala.
Kamala Harris is the first African American, Asian American, and woman to be elected as the Vice President of the United States.
Perfect, thank you.
In 2003, Kamala became the District Attorney of San Francisco. In 2010, she was elected as the Attorney General for the state of California.
Great. So she's from California.
Harris later became a U.S. Secretary of State,
Sorry.
There you go.
a U.S. Senator in 2017, where she worked on legislation for public works and the environment.
Perfect. So now we know a little bit more about Kamala. Then we're gonna exit out of that. Let me just press the escape. There we go. Alright. So let me go to our next slide here. I'm gonna skip it twice because it's gonna play again, right? So this is just extra information if you're ever curious about any other Black American leaders who have done things in the last 10 years in the United States. Feel free to scan the QR code and learn a little bit more about them. Some of the people I already talked about are on this list, but there's many people I was not able to talk about. So feel free to scan that. But I also want to highlight this, and then we're going to talk, because I see the time.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of it. But essentially, I want to show you that Black History Month around the United States. Let me just kind of full screen
So
that.
someone asked, like, how do we celebrate it? Like,
Yes.
this is just a little snippet
This
of
is a
how
little
we,
taste
yeah.
on how it's celebrated. So first, companies such as Nike, as many of you know, the shoe company, might release Black History Month collections where they design different shoes featuring different Black History Month symbols and elements, right? Or you're seeing that Black-owned businesses are more supported or highlighted. Because remember, for a lot of US history, Black Americans could not own property. They could not have businesses of their own. So now that many people are able to do that, they want to show this way of how this kind of history has progressed. You're seeing in stores like Walmart, which is like Korzinka, but like times 100, because there's so much stuff there. Walmart also wants to highlight Black-owned products. So the products they sell at their stores, they'll show you and say, oh, this was created by a Black-owned business. Maybe you might want to consider looking into them, right? Or then you have in schools, for example, this is a teacher reading a book about Black History Month to her students. So you're having schools share more of the history to students. Or you're having kids. These are some cute kids dressed up as Black History Month icons. People that they really, really like. Maybe musicians, maybe astronauts, and you're having companies like Starbucks, a coffee company, showing how they're supporting Black History Month either through drinks or through custom cups that have different designs for the month itself.
Yeah, and I want to go on the school. So it's
Yeah.
not just like stories on Black history, but also like novels or picture books that highlight Black characters
Yes.
as like the key and the heroes, because that kind of literature is also a way to kind of promote and recognize the community.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for sharing.
And films as well.
A lot of films.
Yeah,
Like Soul.
filmmakers and film actors and actresses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the country supports this, right? The country supports this because given, if we look at the population really quickly, if we look at the percentages, it seems small, but if we're looking at the numbers, for example, 190 million people identify as white, or 24 million people identify as Asian, almost 47 million people identify as Black. That's more than the entire population of Uzbekistan, right? So this is a big community, right? And this community, for a long time, didn't always get the same presence that they have today, right? Or the 62 million people that identify as Hispanic, right? So I'm gonna go past this, right? But I just wanna talk for the rest of the time. Because I talked a lot at you, because there's a lot to share. But I know that there are some questions I still didn't answer. So I'm gonna ask, what kind of food do people usually eat? There is Black American soul food, but it's not usually something that is eaten during Black History Month. It's just an all year round thing. Yeah. And someone asked, why do we celebrate it? Eileen mentioned the importance of that. But what else can we talk about while we're here? And I'll sit